Hey good people, hola mi gente, MsMalcolmHughes here. Welcome back. Today we're coming to do a book review that I'm a little excited to discuss. So let's get into it. Today's book review is on Friday Black by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. I actually got to meet him at a book signing here in DC recently, and I actually got this one signed, so that's exciting. But what's more exciting is what we're gonna get into with this book of short stories. We're gonna take them one by one. I'm gonna give you my overall opinion of the collective work, whether or not I think you should read it, my pros and my cons. So first thing first, the first story. The first story in Friday Black is titled The Finkelstein Five. And this was a good story to open the book with. And the reason for that is it immediately grounded you, at least immediately grounded me, in a specific historical story and context. I originally thought of the Central Park Five. If you don't know that story, definitely look it up. But that is what the series When They See Us, I believe is the name, over on Netflix was based on. I only watched the first episode and was gutted. I knew where the story was gonna go. I didn't finish it, but it was well done and got a lot of praise and acclaim, and I'm sure it's worth it. But sometimes it's just trauma on trauma on trauma, and it was heavy. But if you haven't seen it, definitely may want to check it out. But let's get into what the Finkelstein Five is about. So in essence, it's a story where a group of children have been wrongfully murdered by a guy in front of a library. He was there with his children. He said he felt as if the children were attacking him, and so he beheaded them with a shovel or some tool he grabbed from his car. And we go back and forth. He's on trial for it, so we go back and forth between the trial and what's happening as a result of the trial. And that juxtaposition is actually quite brilliant because it grounds you in why the actions outside of the trial are happening and why people are so frustrated. I won't give too much away as far as the actual content of that story, but I do want to go into the highlights and what were some pros and cons for me. So one thing that was really interesting was the idea of blackness. The idea of blackness for our main character was on a 10-point scale, and his ability to control it. And so one thing in our times, we call it like code switching and assimilation, but what it essentially is he'd wake up and, you know, depending on how he dressed, whether he was in business attire or if he was in casual wear, if he had his hat to the back, if he was feeling angry, if he was feeling calm, all of these things contributed to how black he was at any given moment. You know, he might be like, oh, I haven't been this high on the blackness scale. He might be like a 7. I haven't been this high in a long time. He usually tries to go no higher than a 4. And so just thinking about the limitations and strain that puts on a person to always be in that psychological battle of trying to constrain themselves and conform. And so that I just thought was really interesting to put it so plainly on a 10-point scale. Even though, as I described it, this is obviously a heavy topic, there was a line that just really made me laugh out loud. And the attorneys are, you know, going back and forth. And they're like, but they were kids. And he's like, yes, they were kids. But also, F N-words. And it's like, what? And so, again, to put something that's probably said in private so plainly on the page, I thought was well done. It actually reminds me, that bit reminds me a little bit of just the blatant honesty of Long Division. If you haven't read that work, please check it out. I have a review of it up on my channel. Chef's Kiss. It has one of my all-time most favorite written like little monologues in there, but watch the video. Another thing I liked is, without trying to tell too much, there are retaliations that are happening as a result of this case. And one, I like the juxtaposition of people being well dressed. They're in their Sunday's best, hello, while committing these acts of retribution against other folks. And I like that these acts are also called naming, as in say their names. And that's actually the only thing they say while it's happening. The only thing they say afterwards when they're caught is the name of one of the individuals who were murdered. And I like that because again, it plays on that scale of blackness, of appearing safe, of trying to don yourself with this attire so that you can be more palatable to those outside of your racial group. And so I love that. Another line that I really enjoyed was someone's like, why'd you do it? Why'd you do it? And of course they only say the name, but then one person went outside of that and they said, if I had words left in me, I would not be here. And in my notes I said, whew, a word. And absolutely, because sometimes you get to such a point where you're like, there are no more words. If I had more words in me to give you, I wouldn't have turned to these actions. And I felt that in a very physical way. Also, I can say that the way that this stories went with the trial, that especially the trial aspects, really reminded me of the Boondocks. If you don't know me, I'm a big fan of Aaron McGruder. The first 3 seasons of the Boondocks, the comic books, just a really big fan. The aspects of this story that were taking place in court really reminded me of the R. Kelly trial, that Boondocks episode, and just the outlandishness of it. If you know that episode, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, but it's just wild. You're just like, this is mad. It's so crazy, and it's same here. Another thing was really thinking about this in the context of what's happening in modern times. So as you all know, when that incident happened in Alabama with Chair, a lot of people used the video with the song Try That in a Small Town, but actually that song and that video itself are actually very problematic. And in that video, they're singing in front of the Maury Courthouse, which was actually historically a place where a black teenager was lynched. But I say that because it happens in these spaces that are supposed to be sacred. And in our story, it happens in front of a library, but it happens in churches, it happens in schools. And so I felt and appreciated Adjei for having that real world context and putting it in that historical positioning. So I thought that was another just like pro of the book. Another aspect of the story that I think makes it great is that it's not just black versus white. There's also, if you're a black person, where do you find your footing within that? If you are someone who understands the frustrations and you feel them deeply, but also you don't want to harm innocent people, where do you land within that? And so for me, there was a scene where our protagonist, before he decides what he wants to do, he screams out, "I don't know what you want me to do." For me, that was just the crux of trying to determine what's right or what's wrong. What do you do in these type of situations? And I just was curious, like, what would people have done in that situation? If you were in that moment of that one feeling with your people very deeply, the frustrations, but also not wanting to harm innocent people, would that be a difficult decision for you? Would your conscience be leaning very clearly one side or the other? I'm actually intrigued in that, so if you're comfortable, let me know in the comments down below. But overall, I really enjoyed the story. Thought it was a great opening, really thought-provoking, and I thought that it was just a great start to the work. Then we go into the next story, which is Things My Mother Said. And this one, I only had a couple of notes, but I really thought it was an endearing reflection on how things come full circle. It was a succinct capturing of the relationship between him and his mother. Very short, just my mother said this, my mother said that, how it played out, the full scope and story of their lives. So I thought that one was a bit more autobiographical, but it was still touching to have here. The next story is The Era. Oh, and this one was good because it really toyed with the idea of honesty and history and what's truth and what's lie and how does it impact the present. So I thought that was really good. But I was curious again for you all, like, is 100% honesty a good thing? Do you think that it is, or do you think that it can cause problems? Again, let me know in the comment section. And I also said, like, I like the commentary on our modern society and the way in which we categorize people in hierarchies. And I also like the commentary on substance abuse and dependency. However, I did not like the ending. It felt premature, like the story may have had more that it wanted to say. And so we do go with our protagonist through a couple of like challenging moments and what all of that means for him and why he's dependent on different things. But when we got to the resolution at the end of the story, I was like, eh. And y'all know I'm big on endings, so that was my big con for that one. And then we have Lark Street, the next story. Oh, this one was really interesting, actually. It was a story, and it was a unique twist for me, I felt like, about abortion and the decision to abort and who's impacted by it. We have our main character who really wakes up to like being abused by these fetuses that have been extracted from his partner. and they're going through this journey of like they had wanted to live and what does all of this mean for them. And it was actually a really good twist on the topic. And so in the end, I felt like I walked away feeling as if it was like powerful stuff about the way men feel the weight of abortions too. And having known men in real life who their partners got abortions and they didn't want them to abort, I definitely understand the impact and the weight that it has on men. And I think people don't often consider that. And so it's both partners who created the child, and it's both partners who are impacted by these decisions. And I'm not telling people what to do. I'm always for a woman's right to choose, but I do think that we have to consider and sometimes stop making it as if one group of people don't have feelings, when everyone is human and everyone has feelings, and decisions that are made always impact all parties involved. And I felt like this short story was a good commentary on that. Next up, we have the hospital where, and this one was interesting in the sense that I kept having this question of like, is our main character in the story or is our main character writing the story? And so we have a character who's in the hospital with his father, but so many things are happening within the hospital, and he himself has essentially made a pact with the devil, not called the devil, but that's essentially what has happened, in order for his life to change. So he wants a great gift, and his great gift is writing. So it's always not even confusing, because I feel as if it was done intentionally, but it's always this tug and war of, is what is happening actually happening? Is this happening in his head? Is this what he's creating? Is he living this moment? So I thought that was really, really good for us to always be in this tug of war of questioning that. But I really walked away. I said there was a lot of interesting storylines happening, and the ending, it really reminded me of If the People Could Fly. And I don't know if you've read that, but it was a children's book that it was a book that we had on our mantle when I was growing up. And it was one that I always went to because it had interesting stories. And it really dealt with this idea of like liberating or liberation, but really in liberating oneself. So a lot of that was also present here. So it was one of the stories that I really enjoyed. The next story is Zimmerland. And as you can imagine, when you hear Zimmer, you think of Zimmerman. Ugh. But that's immediately what you go to, the story with Trayvon Martin and all of that, and what does it mean? And that is actually what this story is about. So we actually have our main character who works at this, I'm gonna call it amusement park, who works at this amusement park of sorts, where people can come and relive that moment, that conflict. They say that it's done from the sense of, instead of people reenacting this in real life, or instead of people killing young black men in real life, they can come to the park and get out those feelings. Obviously, when you hear that, people have multiple reactions to that, strong feelings. You'd be on one or two sides, right? Or you could be another emotion, but generally speaking, people are very separate on one or two sides. If this is right or this is wrong. And we have our main character who essentially has to deal with that. He chooses to work there. He kind of gets it, but it's also kind of heavy for him. And so that's what we're grappling with. And I did say, I was like, initially it reminds me of a Black Mirror episode where people enact revenge on a guilty woman, and that's what was happening here. The only thing is people are murdering an innocent child again and again. So people come back multiple times. And this one was really, it caused you to question the idea of justice. What is justice? What is right and wrong? What does it mean? And is that it really was a complex but strange concept, and I think it's really meant to send a message to society. So not one of my favorite stories, but still well written and well done. Next up, we have the one after the title, Friday Black. And this one was mad. As someone who used to work in retail, it was a lot. But it really captures Black Friday and the insanity of it all. It obviously heightens it and takes it all the way, with people actually dying and it being really not a big deal. But in essence, it's about how everyone is impacted. It's an addiction for the shopper, and it can be for the seller as well. And so it unpacks all of that and grapples with it. So I did enjoy that story. Next up, we have The Lion and the Spider, and that was really written more mythological. It's a bit kind of folklorish, but it's the unpacking of family trauma through a fable. And so I really enjoyed that. And I think it does a good job of weaving together many topics and aspects in one story. You have the fable aspect, you have the relationship between this family, whether it's the children and the father, the mother and the father, and what does all of it mean? And then at the conclusion of the story, it's like, what did you walk away with? Do you think that's the right answer? Do you think they handled it well? And sometimes in complex family issues, you don't. There's no plain right or wrong answer. So you have to grapple with all of it. And so I thought that was well done. Next up, we have Light Spitter. Oh, this one was really, really good, actually. But it was dealt with the topic of school shootings. And so it tackled it from the perspective of the killer and the killed in the afterlife. So it was a really interesting twist on it. An interesting concept, a sad reality, but I think that he was really able to grapple with a lot of what was happening for both individuals, their side, and putting them in the afterlife while they're still trying to help people who are dealing with that in the current situation was actually really, really nice. That was a really nice touch, and so I really enjoyed that story. Next up, we have How to Sell a Jacket as Told by Ice King, and this one kind of builds on the story that I was discussing earlier, Friday Black, where we just have this situation that went to the edge, right? A seller dealing with the weight of it all ends up not wanting to live anymore, and the impact of all of that. So it really delves even deeper into the nature of sales and retail, the competitive nature and the loyalty of customers to one person, but how that can create conflict. As someone who's worked in retail, I never enjoyed being a seller, so that's not what I did, but sellers can be intense and quite competitive. And this really unpacked a lot of that. And then the savagery of sales is what I said. And I was like, that is the word for it, because it can be very cutthroat sometimes. The microaggressions of it, the dog eat dog aspect of it, it can be a lot, but this story did a great job of demonstrating all of that. Next, we have In Retail. I don't know if our writer worked in retail at some point. A lot of us have, so I feel like he was really unpacking a lot of that here. But again, it delves into that dark side of retail, but also it brings into it the moments of light, right? The moments where the doors open up and a ray of sunshine walks in. And in this case, it was an older Spanish woman, and it dealt with the humanness of it, of trying to meet in the middle. He speaks a little Spanish, she speaks a little English, but using that and having those moments and that sincerity. And then there's commentary on how like the younger generation doesn't always have that. And so it deals with a lot as far as like interracial interactions and how we treat each other, and in this like store environment. So it was nice, and I think you really walk away with an understanding of the importance of kindness and connection, and really seeing each other as humans outside of all the other cultural impacts. So it was really touching, especially when we had so many heavy stories about retail. This one was really nice. And then we have our last story, which is Through the Flash. And for me, it was like similar to Marvel. It appears that people have lived through some flash that has altered everyone in one way or another, and they keep repeating the same day again and again, and the impacts of that. And some people have certain strengths and some people don't, so how people abuse that, and then how they come together, because it keeps happening over and over, and then the evolution of these people over time. So again, I thought it was an interesting concept, and I thought that this indicated how some of the stories just connect throughout the entire series of short stories. A little bit really sci-fi or even fantasy aspects of it in the work, but again, I really enjoyed it. Overall, I think that Friday Black had a lot of like really strong stories, some stronger than others, obviously. I didn't love every story, but there was something to take away from each one, so I really appreciated that aspect of it. Pros are those also strong writing. It's good writing here. I am definitely excited to read his next work, his first novel, to see how he grows even more, but great concepts, executed well, and overall I enjoyed it. Is this the best short story series I've ever read? No, but it's good and it stands on its own. Cons, again, sometimes the endings felt premature. Sometimes, it's so far out there that it's a reach, but you appreciate the effort, right? You appreciate seeing that and that he took the chance, so I love that. No strong cons, just want to see him really evolve more as a writer, get stronger in his gifts. Definitely a solid opening. And so on my scale of like read now, read when you have time, to read it if you want, I would say this is a definite read it when you have time. I would definitely recommend that folks read it. I wouldn't recommend that you like drop everything and read it now, but I would recommend that you read it. It gives you a lot to grapple with and consider. So definitely check it out when you have the time. That's it for me. As always, I am MsMalcolmHughes, one who believes that books are sometimes better than people. And until the next one, please remember to give time, to be kind to each other, and to have the very best day of your life on purpose. Peace, odabo, adios, ciao.